Hey, James Kerti here, back with another episode of the HoopsThink show where we break down the game and build it back up. Talking today with Frank Burlison, a very distinguished basketball scout who's been in the game at a long time at a few different levels. In the last decade or so, he's perhaps most noted for discovering such players as Russell Westbrook and James Harden early on in their high school careers. He has personal testimonials from both of them to that effect. That's pretty cool. And in this episode of the Hoops Think Show, we're talking about what it takes to be a good evaluator. We also riff on topics like how to evaluate talented young point guards and also how decision making develops in players over the course of their high school, college, and potentially NBA careers. So, really cool episode. Hope you guys enjoy it today. I gotta give a quick shout out to my boys at Brew Pony. If you're a basketball nerd like me, that means a lot of late nights and early mornings, and that means caffeine. But don't drink crappy coffee. Brew Pony delivers fresh artisan coffee into your mailbox every month. It's very affordable, the coffee is fantastic, and I got you hooked up. 10% off if you go there and enter coupon code HoopsThink. So again, that's www.brewpony.com. 10% off with coupon code HoopsThink. Get on it. James Kerti here with Frank Burlison. Frank, excited to have you aboard today, man. And within NBA and college circles, I think a lot of guys know who you are. But for some of the people who haven't been introduced to you, can you just give us that little pitch about who you are and what you got going on?
Well, James, I'm based in Southern California. I live in the southern part of Orange County, about 50 miles south of downtown LA per se, and about 55 miles north of downtown San Diego. So I'm kind of like right between the two centers of Southern California, I would guess most people would say.
Totally.
I live in the center of Orange County, and then, of course, the southernmost city in the state is San Diego, and certainly the mega metropolis of Southern California is in Los Angeles per se. So I've lived here, Southern California, all my life, and actually lived where I live now for the last 20 years or so. But I've been a sports writer ever since I was a teenager. Still in high school, I was writing professionally for local newspapers, and right out of high school, right into high school, I went to work for the Press Telegram. Went full time with them when I was about 20 or 21. And then, I kind of gravitated towards basketball at a young age, covering basketball, and got to know a lot of players and high school coaches and college coaches. And a lot of those guys kind of morphed as they got older and became players or coaches on the next level. There are a lot of guys now who are people, either GMs or coaches in the NBA. Guys like Byron Scott I covered when he was in high school, and Danny Ainge was on the Press Telegram, my Long Beach Press Telegram's first ever Best in the West team in 1977. And, some of the guys I saw play in high school include Magic Johnson and, obviously Kevin Garnett and LeBron James, Kobe Bryant. So I think most of the elite level high school players I've basically seen 90 to 95% of them guys who are the best players in high school who go on to the NBA. I've seen probably 90 to 95% of them since the middle 70s I've seen at some point in their high school career. So I kind of get the entire scope of a player's career from high school to college and then the NBA. And that's kind of what the realm of what I cover basketball is, from high school to college. And obviously, as you well know, I see a lot of even guys younger than high school, middle school type players. So I left the newspaper business 2 years ago after working for the Press Telegram and Orange County Register and Fox Sports for 35-ish, closer to 40 years, I guess. And the last 2 years I've just gone basketball full time with my Burlison basketball scouting service, which I sell to NBA teams and colleges, and then website, which of course the great James Kerti designed and
Truth.
implemented for me. BurlisonBasketball.com, still free, which is in this industry, as we well know,
I'll get the link out there to viewers.
Yeah, I get
the link below the video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but again, I've covered I think every Final Four, credential member of the media for every Final Four, starting with 1986. I covered the 1984 Summer Olympics in LA when Bob Knight coached, and Michael Jordan and Patrick Ewing and Chris Mullin, Blake Wayman, Tisdale, and Sam Perkins, and all those guys were part of it. So that was a great experience. And right now I just kind of developing my relationships and trying to pick up more clients within the NBA and college worlds. And and go from there. But again, love all aspects of basketball and have worked hard to learn the game, understand the game, and in the process try to earn the respect of the people who play it and coach it and follow it.
Definitely, Frank. And, people who are just checking out your website for the first time, it's hard not to notice that you have personal testimonials and endorsements on there from a couple guys, including James Harden and Russell Westbrook, saying that you were basically the guy who kind of discovered them. So first question to you, like, when you were watching those guys early on, what were like a couple of the things that really jumped out at you about Russell and about James, when other guys hadn't really seen them too much yet? What did you see in them?
Well, and James, you know this too well because you have a good sense for scouting basketball players and evaluating players. And again, and I tell this every time I speak to groups or sports management worldwide classes. I think the general, even the casual fan, can watch a game on TV or in person and say, "Oh, there's LeBron James. Yeah, he's a great player," or Kobe Bryant or someone. I mean, my wife Julie really didn't know a whole lot about basketball before I met her about 8 years ago, and now she can watch the game and without me telling her who the players is, she goes, "Oh, there's the 2 or 3 best players." And again, I say that to illustrate the point that I think a lot of people, be it casual fan or hardcore fan, can watch a game in person on TV and identify, how good a player is at that moment when they're watching them. Because you see it. It's a tangible thing. He scores the most buckets. He makes the biggest plays defensively or rebounding or, great passes or whatnot. But I think where the trick is, and I think not as many people could do this as well, because, again, it takes, experience and savvy and insight, is watching a player at maybe a younger age, not necessarily, 14, 15, but even 18, 19, 20 into college, and say, okay, this is what he is now, but I think in 3 or 4 years, as he gets stronger, as he gets more mature, as he fills out, as his shot, as he gets people working on a shot a little bit more, if he gets a little bit more of a fundamental base, and all those kind of things, you see that, and then you say, okay, well, how good can he be if all those things take place? How good can he be if he continues to work hard? How good can he be if he gets good coaching? So if you kind of consider all those factors, then I think the other thing you have to do is you think back, and I refer to my mental database. I think back in my mind over the course of 40 plus years, and of all the players I've seen at a comparable age and who they remind me of, and because obviously most of the players who are very, very good now or in recent years, I saw them young, so I have a sense for what they were at that age. And again, totally. Put in all those factors, and you kind of let them stew around a little bit and simmer, and then you kind of come up with what you think. Of course, there's the X factors, as you know as well as anyone, James. It's certain things and that you really can't, no matter how long you watched and no matter how many players you've seen and no matter how well you really understand the game, how it should be played, how it should be coached, how it should be worked at to become a good player, is the thing you really can't make a projection is, okay, how hard is this kid going to work? Will his mind stay focused on basketball? Will he get sidetracked when he gets to college by women or partying or
all those little X factors?
We've seen that a lot. Very good, very, very good high school players who get to college and they lose focus and they get caught up in the women and the partying and all those things. Maybe getting their hands on some money for the first time. And the same thing in the NBA. How are guys going to react once they get a whole lot of money? Will they continue to work hard like Kobe Bryant obviously did, and LeBron James, and all the players whose games even kept evolving once they got into the NBA and kept evolving once they were all-stars? So those are, you really can't tell, because again, unless you really, really know the player and know all the factors involved in, how they think about things and what their goals are, you're just kind of guessing on that. So again, you could see all the factors and you would say, he's going to be great. And then something happens with, things he shouldn't do or things that distract him from that goal. And again, you really can't tell that. So that's the one X factor that kind of makes it, as I've always said, and I think one of the first times we talked, I said, hey, no matter how many games you see, no matter how many players you get right, no matter how many great evaluations you make, no matter how many times you've seen it all. This is not an exact science. This isn't a thing where you can throw a couple variables into a math formula and get come up with an equation that will always tell you who's going to be a player. It's not an exact science.
Totally.
So again, a lot of it is experience. A lot of it ultimately comes down to guesswork and what the player wants to do mentally and work ethic wise that you really can't gauge until you actually see him do it.
Definitely, man. And one particular thing I wanted to ask you about on this interview show here at HoopsThink, one of the things we talk about a lot is the pick and roll. And for me, sometimes sitting with you and evaluating some of these point guard prospects that we've seen, I always just kind of wonder, I feel like a lot of people look at the point guard guys just in terms of how many assists they get or how many points they score, or how fast they are, or how high they jump. But it seems to me that with so many more college and especially NBA teams just running ball screen type of offenses, shouldn't we be evaluating these kids in terms of how well they run the pick and roll? What do you think?
Well, I mean, the pick and roll, as you well know, James, I mean, in an NBA offensive system where there's a 24-second clock, so you can't go real deep into an offense, like in terms of running one, the first option breaks down, so you go to a second option or maybe even a third option in terms of college, because you have a 35-second clock, so you have 11 more seconds to play with and to really go deep into your offense. Get to the NBA, if they take away that first option and suddenly you look up and it's 7, 6, 10, 9, 8 seconds, well, you're not going to go, okay, let's get a ball reversal and pick up and go opposite and screen opposite.
Absolutely.
What it comes down is to, usually your post player, not always your post player, but usually your post player, he comes out and sets a high streak at the ball. You want the ball in your, not necessarily just your quote-unquote point guard, because certainly Kobe Bryant isn't a point guard per se, but you want the ball in your best decision maker and your best playmaker, and that's a guy who, with the shots running down, has the best chance to make a play for himself or a teammate outside the confines of the traditionally structured offense. So again, high screen, maybe he rolls to the basket, maybe he flares for a pick and pop situation, and then of course the point guard has to read the situation. A classic example, I think, of people who may have watched the Cleveland Brooklyn game Tuesday night, the season opener. Again, a lot of comparable decisions were made by Kyrie Irving in late shot clock situations. I think once he penetrated and hit Valerjo was rolling to the right, no time he penetrated, he popped, he got the ball to him. So again, you saw all the situations in which a very elite level point guard, which Kyrie Irving certainly is, the coach puts the ball in his hands basically and says, okay, well, we're going to depend on you to read the situation, what the defense will give you if the defense just totally breaks down or whatnot. So again, that's a big part of point guard play, but where I think a lot of people, when they evaluate players or they look at a point guard's worth, is strictly, production and point, as a point guard, because again, and pick and roll, because again, the good teams are going to take away what you do strongest, even if it's in if it's in a pick and roll. So again, point guards got, as well as the entire offense, has to adapt and be multifaceted. If you just run pick and roll all day, they're going to take it away. I mean, they're going to, now in the NBA they could zone you, they could do all kinds of things. So that's one aspect of a point guard, but certainly not the only one. And again, I think you made reference to stats. I mean, analytics are an interesting thing. Somebody sent me a story, talked about, well, if you break down all the quantitative statistics, you got guys who are better than LeBron James and stuff like that, because they break down the percentages, what he shot in this situation, how effective they were in the situation. Again, and a lot of NBA guys, I know this too. That's the math, if you will, and the numbers and the number crunching, and all those things are important issues in evaluating not only players but how well a team executes. But sometimes it just comes down to, you watch a game and no matter what numbers tells you, you're not going to think, whoever you can think of with maybe better numbers. I'll never forget John Hollinger, God bless him. Yes. It was in the era when Steve Nash, I think, was at his apex of his career, and I think it is right in the middle, in the process of his
So we're talking
back-to-back.
like 05, 06, 07 ish.
Yeah, when he won those back-to-back MVPs, and he had Hollinger, I guess, was one of the. I think at the time he worked for the Orlando paper or something, and then went to ESPN. And
Yeah.
oh, isn't he working for an NBA team now or something? But
He's working with Memphis. Yeah, he's in their front
yeah,
office.
and again, you look at his numbers. I'll never forget. Here was Nash when he was certainly the dominant point guard in the league. If you want to say nothing else, if you don't want to believe he should have been MVP, which the MVP other than LeBron the last few years is often a subject for debate, and it's one man's perspective. Is it the best player, or is it the quote unquote most valuable player? And I remember seeing his race. So he's got all these rankings and all these quadrants and graphs and numbers and this and that and all these percentages. And I think he had, this is off the top of my head, I think Steve Nash had rated as the 6th or 7th best point guard in the league. And the 27th best player in the league. I thought to myself, that analysis alone makes me doubt anything. I think we've had this discussion on the chats with Sports Management World. That analysis alone makes me doubt the validity of something like that. But again, I know it's another thing that NBA people, to various degrees, in talking with NBA peoples and GMs and stuff, to various degrees, I don't think the smart, prudent decision makers in the NBA are ever going to come down to, okay, crunch the numbers, break down, the synergy films.
Yeah, it's just another tool.
Every possible situation, and that's how they evaluate players and make decisions. I think it's going to be a combination. At some point, as you watch a player and all those things you've learned over a long course of time in terms of what is a player, what a player should be, you let your own eyesight and your mental ability to analyze and have some perspective. At some point, that's going to supersede numbers, I got to think.
Yeah, I think you're right, Frank. And going back to what you're talking about before with some of the young point guards out there, one topic I'm really interested in, we've talked about this off camera before, is just decision making. And do you feel like maybe evaluators are underestimating the importance of decision making and finding young players, and maybe overestimating the ability of guys to improve their decision making once they reach a certain point?
Well, I mean, this is interesting. I think this is one of the, with Ed.
Ed talks about Ed Gregory talks about it quite a bit.
Gregory, of course, one of the great basketball minds and scouts of the 70s and 80s and 90s, and is also involved in sports management worldwide with James and I and Josh. It's certain things. You can become a better shooter. You can become stronger. You can become, to a certain degree, quicker. You could fundamentally improve, but again, I think certain things can be coached in terms of decision making. Decision making is a little bit of a nebulous term.
It's true
because I think it encompasses a lot of things. Because at some point, decision making might not actually be making a decision; it's doing what you were coached to do. So it's not really a decision you're making. It's just, I see this, so this is what I'm supposed to do. You're not making your own judgment. I know maybe I'm getting a little too out.
I think that's spot on. I mean, it's good to have that distinction there. It's important.
Think a lot of the stuff that you see in a point guard in terms of leadership, so much of it's leadership, and you got your vocal leaders, you got your animated leaders, and you got your silent leaders who, can communicate what he wants the team to do or what the team should be doing, not necessarily by verbally getting to a guy's, vocally being harsh or cussing or whatnot, but just by their silent leadership. I think I had a chance to watch Kyrie Irving in some practice situations. The first week of the season, I watched their practice. I was back in Cleveland visiting with Chris Grant and his staff. They're good friends of mine, and they invited me to back watch practice. And you see Kyrie Irving. He's not a real vocal guy. He's not a vocally pump guys up. He just kind of leads through example, and he's quiet, and he's a hard worker, and he's no nonsense. So I think they have to follow that. But he's definitely not the point guard like Chris Paul's a fairly fiery guy.
Absolutely,
or Westbrook's a very vocal type of guy, and so it's interesting. But I think there's a lot of things about what we traditionally consider a point guard that a kid or a player, I think, develops them at a very, very early age. Maybe it's part of their personalities, even beyond basketball. So it's just their personas. Maybe they're that way in classroom settings away from basketball or other leadership situations. Look at Magic Johnson, certainly one of the great leaders or point guards in the history of basketball, and based upon his success in the business world away in terms of business leaders gravitating towards his persona and a lot of things he does that he, be it the Dodgers, who knows how big his role is there, but other than, financial thing, but his movie theaters in Los Angeles have been very, very successful. So I think a lot of stuff is just personality traits that necessarily can't be coached, but I think a lot of I think a lot of things can be coached, but there's a fine balance. Again, when we talk about point guards, a point guard for one system or one coach might another system might require certain things from quote unquote a point guard that another system might not. So again, a lot of times it's the system you play, but I think that being said, if you're a point guard who loves to score, and Chris Paul is one of those kind of guys, certainly Russell Westbrook,
it works, yeah.
You still have to have a sense for making the right play at the right time, and sometimes maybe them creating a shot for themselves is the right play. So
exactly. Sometimes
it's a fine line, and again, it's not a black and white situation, and there's shades of gray in all players, but certainly in point guards, which is why I have a tough time where people always want to just rank players based on the best point guards. Well, what type of point guard do you mean? Do you need a Steve Nash who's the consummate floor leader, or do you want a guy like a Westbrook who's can push the ball and attack and make physical plays just through his sheer athleticism and competitiveness? So again, there's a lot of. We have this. I have this discussion with it was always funny. I think I've had this discussion with you, James, with Joel Francisco the other night. Joel, who lives in Los Angeles area, is a high school teacher, but does the West Coast high school stuff for ESPN. And
yep.
He says, you notice how interesting whenever there's discussions of point guards, or some people will say Chris Paul, some will say Westbrook, some will say Rondo, some will be, when he's healthy, Darren Williams. The best point guard in basketball is LeBron James, and I think somebody.
Yes, thank you.
I think somebody, Joel was saying he was watching the NBA show, and someone said, hey, let's face it, he's in reality the best player at almost any position he wants to be on the court at the time. So again, but people see him at 6'8", 260 pounds or whatever he is in this otherworldly athlete, and they don't see point guard. Well, I remember back in '77 flying to Washington. First time I'd been into the East Coast, I think I was 20. To the Capitol Classic as part of the first time they'd had the McDonald's selection committee. They flew me back there for that. And I'm watching this practices for a couple of days. I'm just seeing this kid who's about 6'8", 205 pounds, 6'8", legit 6'8". And then this guy handles the ball like a guy 5'8", this and that. And I came back and I watched the game. I watched a couple of practices of scrimmage. And I thought to myself, he had a pretty good amount of publicity. Pre-internet, pre-heavy newspaper coverage of recruiting in high school basketball. But I knew who he was because I followed it close enough and talked to coaches and would go to the libraries and get all the papers across the country. So I knew who this kid was. I came back, I told all my coaching friends and writing peers, I said, this guy's a point guard. How can a 6'8" guy be a point guard? And, well, it was, of course, Irvin Johnson, Magic Johnson. So back then it was such a radical bit of thinking to conceive of watching a guy at 6'8", as he later played in the NBA. He was probably 235, 240 or whatnot. But he was a point guard, no matter how big he is. He's a point guard, and I think in reality, as good as LeBron is in a lot of other ways, I mean, when we talk about situation when you want the ball in your best player's hands in terms of making plays, well.
Yeah, and you watch the Heat. I mean, he's the guy. He's their shot creator. He's their playmaker.
But again, people want to think of guys who are the 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2" as being the point guard. And people get locked into assigning positions when they look at players by size and body types instead of really how they're operating on a court and within the context of a team's offense and defense too, of course.
Definitely, Frank. And I run out of time. Got to wrap this up in a few. But one thing I just want to hit on real quick. You were just talking about how to evaluate guys in terms of like maybe like what their role would be instead of what their traditional position might be. Based on like their height or their weight or anything kind of like that. So let's say somebody's watching this video right now and they're going to go watch a game on TV tonight. What's kind of like one thing that they could look at it through that lens to start making that adjustment? Because I think it is kind of radical for people.
Yeah, if you're watching an NBA game, and that's what most of the games are right now, you're watching a guy who, they're playing their position. They're playing the position that by the time you're in the NBA, and the position you play is probably, unless it's a situation where a team has a bunch of injuries or they have, if you're at 6'7", what I mean, if there's a lot of players at your position and maybe they move you over. But I think when you watch a player in high school in your kind of evaluating or scouting situation or college, remember a lot of times that position they're playing now might be one out of need that coach needs on that level to be successful as a team, even though that might not be his ultimate position because he's going to get bigger in college or maybe he gets because again you'll have a lot of 6'2" in reality point guard type players in high school who are maybe playing small forward or they're becoming the primary scorers on that team because they need them to score and they've got the scoring skill even though in reality their best position can play. So you got to kind of look.
That makes sense.
No matter what level you're recruiting him or projecting him to, okay, he's playing here now position-wise, but ultimately what position does he play in college? And then from college, what position, if he's going to be successful professionally, especially the NBA, what is his ideal position? So those are all kind of things. But again, and again, I think the more anybody who's thinking about getting into scouting or desire to watch as many games as possible, be it high school, be it college, be it NBA, because there are a lot of universal things about basketball that transcends being limited to one level of basketball, being fundamentally sound, boxing out, bending your knees, playing with your hands up offensively and defensively, always be squared up. All these things that you can see if a player is doing or not doing that isn't just limited to one level of basketball. That's why I think you can fine tune your evaluation skills watching any kind of basketball in reality.
Hey, thanks again for tuning in for this week's episode of the HoopsThink Show with Frank Burlison. Great stuff. Hope you had a great time. And if you like this, make sure you hit the like button on this video, get subscribed to the channel, and most importantly, if you want to keep getting the latest updates from HoopsThink on all the great guests we have, as well as some special content that I got coming up, get on the email list at www.hoopsthink.com. Just get your email sign up. You'll get the updates as soon as they're available.